Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to my video podcast on the future of business and technology. And the one big technology that we've been talking about for 2 years now is generative AI. And today I want to talk about the transformative potential of generative AI, especially for large organizations. And to help me do this, I'm joined by Pascal Brier, who is the Chief Innovation Officer and a member of the Group Executive Committee at Capgemini. Welcome, Pascal.
Hi, Bernard, and hi, everybody.
It's so lovely to have you with us. Where are you joining us from today?
Well, I'm joining us today from Paris, but I obviously travel a lot around the world.
Yes. Is Paris where you normally base, where your home is?
Yes.
Lovely. So I'd love to get your perspective on where we are with generative AI today. I know that Capgemini has recently done a big report surveying lots of managers and executives on Gen AI. So where are we today? Because there are some people that feel that generative AI has peaked, others feel that this is hyped up too much, and others say it is the most transformative technology that will have a massive impact on every organization. So where do you sit in all of this? And it would be great to give us a state of the art overview from your perspective.
Well, let's start maybe with some figures just to state the scene. First, it's obvious that generative AI is very hot on the agenda of any company, especially the bigger ones. About 96% of the boardrooms currently have Gen AI on the agenda and have one or two sessions being set before the end of the year. So that's an area where boards are spending time to understand both what the technology is, what the technology allows, and where they stand regarding the adoption of that technology. Second is that if we look at the adoption of the technology itself, I mean, we were about 6% of the bigger companies had adopted Gen AI last year. We now stand at 24%. So there's always two ways to look at it, where 24% is far from being 100. So there's still a long way to go. Now it's fourfold what we had last year. So it's also an astonishing speed of adoption rate. Now, at the same time, when we look into the various studies that we've conducted on how much ROI are company getting from that adoption, we might think that there is some hype around the technology, but because it's still low. I mean, it's about, I would say, 4 to 7% from what we've been able to measure. So we might say it's still a bit limited. For sure. And there's two ways to look at it. If we think that that's the end of it, then there has been too much hype around the technology. Now, if we think it's only the beginning, which is what I tend to think, and we're going to get much more than that, then we can say that yes, there has been some hype, but there is a true thing behind the hype. It's just a matter of time.
Okay, so where do you see the biggest opportunities for large organizations to leverage generative AI?
It's very difficult to answer to that question because, in fact, I think we were too optimistic on how easy it is to implement Gen AI. And rather than Gen AI, I would talk about AI because maybe later in our discussion, I will explain that I don't think the end game is about Gen AI only. I hardly see any environment where Gen AI would do 100% of the job. I think it's much more about being able to build an hybrid AI, which will use various forms of AI together, including generative AI. That will be the solution for the companies. So it's more complex, as I said, than we used to think on how you should implement a Gen AI. And basically, I would say that to be successful, companies need to be able to build 5 domains in their overall Gen AI project. The first one is obviously what I would call the platform enablement, which is choosing the technology and the way they're going to build their overall environment. And this itself is very complex. Obviously, you can take the easy route, which is to say, I trust one vendor and I take everything from that vendor and I just implement that technology. Okay, maybe we can discuss whether that's the best thing to do or not. But most of the time you will have to look at many different type of technologies in the way you're going to build that. The second area will be about what I would call the overall governance of system. And many companies starting their Gen AI journey discover this part. They discovered that you cannot just trust your model to work. You have to manage your models. They tend to evolve in time. Sometimes they drift, sometimes they change. So you need to make sure you have the right governance, not only for guardrails, but also for security, for ethics, for culture. There's many things to look at. So the second things to look at is how do you build this governance around your systems? And then obviously there are your application, your use cases. And I would tend to think that what we've seen over the last 12 months in the more than 600 projects, or close to 700 now, projects that we have built with clients, is that there are three domains of application that you can build with generative AI and AI generally. The first one is what I would call everyday AI, which is putting AI in your current application. Some AI in HR, some AI in procurement, some AI in supply chain, some AI in the contract management, in sales organization. That's okay. This one tends to be easy to implement. And they gave, I would say, relatively interesting results, but nothing astonishing, and will not change your business models. The second one is AI in your products or using AI to build your products, which is a different way, in fact, to look at what you build. And your products can be services, obviously. Yeah? But this part is really interesting because that's where you get potentially a lot of gains in the end. But that's where you discover the importance of having a governance of your systems, because there's no way you can build AI, put it into a product, send that product to the whole world and not, manage the AI that you have put into that product. And the third part, where I think this is where we're going to get the bigger returns, is when really AI is used into your innovation journey. So this is really about building new business models to some extent, which is putting AI at the center and really allowing you to build new types of products and services that you've not done before. But that type, for the moment, is only a fraction of what we see. And this is where I think we're going to get the biggest return in the future.
Very good. And do you have any examples that illustrate this? So if you look across the different use cases, be it everyday AI in your products or services or in your innovation journey, do you have any favorite examples across those that really illustrate the potential impact that you've seen so far, or the potential impact we might see in the future?
Yeah, I'll try to illustrate. Also, as you know, it's always difficult to report on what clients are doing because, again, we're talking about something which was not around a year and a half ago. So everything we're talking about is brand new for things. But the world of everyday AI, I said there's a lot of examples of that, and some very good examples on, for example, upgrading your services by implementing chatbots on top of it that would allow the users of that application really to get much more about the knowledge base from interacting with the chatbots rather than just searching into the application itself. So there's a lot of application there. On the other side of the spectrum, when it comes to building new ways of doing things, we see more and more very innovative ways. For example, in life science, as you know, the everything around drug discovery has been it's not only about generative AI, by the way. This trend has been started using classical neural networks a few years ago, but generative AI is adding a lot to those ways of defining new protocols, new ways to do drug discovery, new types of research on association of molecules that are really changing the game on the scope of research that you can do in that specific domain. And that, for the moment, obviously is not yet triggering major results. But we already see how this technology was able to increase the size, the scope of research that can be done in that domain.
Yeah, I agree. I see a massive potential impact on healthcare and drug development in particular. Um, you work with a lot of different clients on lots of different projects. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that organizations need to overcome to really make the best use out of generative AI? And what sets those organizations that do it really well? What sets them apart?
I think the first challenge is to understand that there is a learning curve. Uh, some people tend to jump on the technology before they understand it. Let me try to explain. Generative AI is a probabilistic technology. So this is giving you the best probability of what the best answer should be to a question that you ask through your prompt. That's fine. But to some extent, generative AI knows nothing about correctness. So you have to understand that there are some environments, in fact, in which using Gen AI might not be the best answer to the question you're trying to solve.
Mm,
So that's the first thing. And that's what I mean. The first thing is the awareness part where you understand the technology. And I tend to spend a lot of time with my clients trying to understand that there are different types of technologies using different types of techniques that answers different types of problems. And Gen AI is perfect for some things. It's not perfect for others. So the first thing I would say is this awareness part and trying to understand what you can get from the technology. The second part is really going through the use case identification.
mm,
And everybody that's where companies tend to be disappointed because there's also a learning curve. I mean, you can't do very complex thing as your first application, so you need also to start learning by doing. And what you also understand, and which is a challenge for companies, is that it's very difficult to implement use cases if you've not done and prepare your people for that. So there's a training part, which is very important. And there's always this question on whether training should come first or should come after when the application is available. And I tend to think that training should come first because training is a way for people to do two things. The first thing is they understand the possibilities of the technology. And the second thing, it also removes some of the fears. It's very difficult to be afraid of what you don't understand. So if people know you're building an application using AI and you're going to be trained on it, they tend to be very doubtful about what are you doing and what are the consequences for me, what's in it for me, and that kind of thing. So I would tend to think that the second challenge is how do we make sure that we train enough people that we do that kind of thing, and that we do the right use case identification. The third one I would say is then the architecture itself, which is what I said before. How do I build this whole thing? What about my data? Which one will I use? Do I want my data to be clean or not? Do I have enough information to really do that kind of thing? Should I rely only on the big, huge generic models? Or should I take smaller models that I would train to my own specific needs? If I have different models, how would they work together? So there's a lot of architecture problem. And that's why I say it's not about just choosing into a catalog whether you go for ChatGPT or Gemini or Yama or things like that. Sometimes it's not an or thing. It's sometimes an and thing. You need this and this and this. So that part is also taking sometimes in the adoption phase. And then the last part, obviously, which is very important, is the scaling thing. How do you define when you're going to scale? we see a lot of companies being stuck in this use case identification and trying. And what we've seen in our study is that obviously the bigger the application is developed and spread, the bigger the ROI. And for example, where the ROI in companies over $20 billion revenue tends to have an 11% ROI compared to 5.6% for lower size companies. And the main difference between the two is the size of deployment of the application.
Interesting. You made the point that we need to figure out when to use generative AI and when not to use it, when it's not the right model for the problem we are looking for a solution. Can you give us some examples of where generative AI might not be the right solution?
Any application that follow the rules of nature and science, mathematical, physical, electrical, fluid dynamics, I would not trust LLMs only, or unless you decide to take something and train it to the extent in that given domain. But it's far better to complement generative AI with other technologies. Might be knowledge graphs, might be classical neural networks. And now this is what we call, at Capgemini, we call it hybrid AI, which is in fact building foundries to some extent, where you put AI mechanism and you ask them to work together. And if you're using an LLM, which is fine, the LLM is the best way to interact with people because it's using natural language processing. And it's a natural way. Nobody wants to interact with a classical neural network because and that's why it was not successful before, is because the technology was not transparent to people. The ideas of, being able to interact using prompt in classical language to an artificial intelligence engine is the reason for the success of generative AI. So we have to keep it, but in many, many applications in the industrial world, we advise our client to ask the LLM to check anything he thinks with someone else, like ask the expert. So go to a knowledge graph, go to another source of knowledge, and once you've taken that knowledge as an input, then come back to me in the best way you can to tell me what I should be doing. But don't work on your own. So that's what we do for most applications we build in the industrial world. We don't go LLMs only. We don't go generative AI only.
Very good. You made the point that training is super important, that you can't scale AI without having the people on board with the right skills. What have you seen in practice? How have organizations trained their employees really successfully to implement generative AI or AI in general?
Well, the first complexity is to understand there's no one size fits all type of thing, because you don't train obviously people that are meant to become developers using AI, Gen AI, just like you would do for a classical user. So obviously you need to define some personas in terms of training and how you would adjust this kind of training. The second thing is that training without any practice is very, very difficult. So and that's always a chicken and egg thing, because as I said before, should I have the use case before I train people, or should I train people before I build the use case? At least, I mean, people need to use it. They need to prompt into a system. They need to understand the way you interact with it. They need to understand the quality of what you get and how you can increase the quality. So it's a bunch of, I would say, classical training plus some practice on top. And then there is no magic. I mean, each company has a different culture. So the way you train, whether you start small and then you increase, or whether you start big because you want really to create a culture people understanding the technology really depends on clients.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of skills, then, if you look across the wider workforce, so not just the people that are developing those AI tools, obviously, we need skilled people that understand machine learning and foundation models and all of this. But I'm more interested in the wider workforce. I mean, you made the point that we need people to use it, because if we don't use it, it's very hard to apply your training. And I read a recent statistic that only 38% of managers have actually practically used generative AI, which I find quite mind blowing. So we've got 60%, over 60% of people have not even used it, which makes it then very hard to understand and apply successfully. So what sort of skills would you recommend people work on if they said, okay, I want to get ready for this AI world and I want to get ready for generative AI? What skills should people focus on?
I'm not sure this is about the skills that people should have. It's much more about the things people should be. I mean, the training you build has to draw attention on some aspects. Like, for example, I don't really believe in, a culture where everybody does its own prompts and it's very difficult to get productivity when there is no ways of doing things. So, for example, training people on how do you prompt into a system to be effective. That's something which for me is important. And for example, we at Capgemini, we provide that as a tool. We have built a tool called Raise, which is bringing some generic patterns for prompting that then clients can obviously tailor to their own needs, but so that people understand that the same way as a good conversation has to have some elements into the sentence so that you can understand what I'm saying. uh, that's the same thing with an AI. It needs the AI. Generative AI has no context, is not context aware. So if you do not give him any context, well, it's just a probabilistic answer again. So only the context can give him, okay, I understand what you mean, I understand what you expect, okay, that's the way you do it. So some training on prompting is interesting. The second thing which is very important is that by using you need to train people and use the system so that they understand the need for example, security and ethics. So why do companies spend time? 50 in our study we show that 50% of the companies claim that they know some of their users are doing things that they are not allowed to do. And most of the time, because they don't understand the risks or the potential thing, it's entertaining, it's fun. So the training is very important to make people understand why companies are spending time on building this governance and guardrails, and why it's important for to look after privacy, security, trust, ethics, and that kind of thing. And the last thing I would mention, we did not talk about it, is that there is a cost. And there is a double cost. There is obviously a cost at using the technology, because in the end, it always goes down to a cloud environment where to some extent you're going to pay some usage. And it has a cost in terms of sustainability, because there's always some, water, electricity being used to run the machines that are in fact answering your questions. So I would say training the people on asking the right questions through prompting, understanding why we talk about security, ethics, and that type of thing, and why this technology doesn't come for free and it has a cost, both in terms of actual money in the pocket and sustainability, are important things. But it's not about skill themselves, because nobody has ever done AI before for the most part. So I think this is much more on how do you build a culture of people understanding how they can use the technology effectively.
Yeah,
And
you make. Sorry, go on.
when we talk about some specific population, like developers, for example, training developers on using generative AI as a pilot or a co-pilot to building codes, it's so easy. I mean, we went from, we've been talking about automation for years. So those guys have already gone through, using automated patterns and then low code, no code. And then GenAI is just, another avatar in the evolution of automatic code. For that population, it's almost instant. They understand, they get it.
Very good. You make some good points there around the trust in AI and the costs of AI. I'd love to explore both of them. So maybe we can start with the trust element. So you talked about that lots of people might be using it to do things that they were not supposed to do. I have just written a number of articles around shadow AI or bring your own AI, where employees basically use generic chatbots to help them with their work. And by doing this, they might share confidential company information with systems that were never designed to cope with this. So this introduces big risks to organizations. So my question here is around governance. How do we make sure that these models are used in a way that comply with policy, with privacy laws, with regulations, with ethics, and so on? And do you have any advice to companies? Have you seen any organizations get this right, and what have they done to ensure that they have the right governance processes in place?
Well, one, as you mentioned, it's an important subject. So companies have to have an opinion on it and decide what they want to do. Otherwise, users will decide for them, and I'm not sure this is the best way to go. Two, what we've seen is that companies all struggle around the same thing. They understand they need to put guardrails, but where should they start? How far should they go? What does it mean exactly? Does it evolve in time? It's always the same question. So to some extent, it's a complex issue, but everybody has the same questions. So we see more and more, uh, companies like us, I mean, coming with some solutions for that. It's not a perfect solution, but at least it's a template which explains what does it mean to have a governance of system and how do you build those things? How do you build your guardrails? So it's a set of questions, and you understand, is there a list of words that should trigger my attention, and I forgive them, and I forbid them from prompts. You cannot use that. Are there some subjects that we don't answer on top of it? And obviously then guardrails and that type of thing can also depend on the kind of sources you use. If you're using a small LLM, which you fully train with your own data, and you're 100% certain about the quality of your data, then it's okay. I mean, it cannot do that much harm. I mean, you know how it's going to behave. Now, if you're using a generic model and you allow people to ask anything into a generic model, then there is much more a danger about exposure to the outside, very strange answers, that problem of correctness, which is not fully solved. Then obviously the guardrails needs to be much stronger. So there is no magic formula, I would say. Just the fact, as I said before, that companies have to consider it as one of their, as I said, 5 things that they need to look at. This is really beyond the platform that they're going to use. The second one is the governance they're going to build around the system. All the more as now 97% of the companies are allowing the use of generative AI. So only 3% are still forbidding it. So that's a lot of companies that need uh, uh, to have a look at that for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Then you talked about costs, and I like the fact that you not just included the subscription costs and the cloud computing costs, but also the environmental costs, because this is something that I sometimes feel is widely overlooked when we talk about cloud computing. People don't understand that there are big data centers somewhere that consume huge amounts of energy and water resources and other things. Do you see this in your day-to-day work, that organizations are taking those environmental costs seriously and take them into account when they decide what platform to use?
Yeah, 2024 will be year one. They start understanding that it has a cost because they have to build their future ESG report. And all of a sudden they say, okay, how do I measure that thing? It's not yet, for most of the clients, it's not yet a major issue because, again, usage tends to be moderate. We're not yet fully scaled at enterprise level. So that's still a minor issue, far less than I would say the vendors themselves who have this a problem of really measuring their own emissions. For clients, it's still moderate, but it's going to grow in the years to come. So there is a growing attention being put to it, and making sure that, again, we don't take it as an entertaining solution. We really look at the useful part of it. To be honest, my own fear is not really on enterprise. When I look at the future, I'm much more worried about, I would say, the general public usage of AI through social networks. Because we've seen that with nobody's aware about the size of storage it takes to send pictures of cats and posting on any social networks that we have, and keeping our mailbox forever without cleaning anything. Nobody knows, nobody understands the cost of that. And I'm afraid that we might have the exact same thing about building very funny videos using fakes images or being images, not understanding the cost it has on the background. And if you multiply it by billions of users, that's going to be far bigger than the enterprise, because again, the enterprise, they have to follow rules, there is regulations, and they have to measure their emissions. So we'll have a spike at some point, but I'm sure we're going to find a solution to keep it reasonable.
Very good. I'd like to get your view on the future of AI. We've talked a lot about where we are today. You made the point that organizations are at the beginning of their journey to implement generative AI. Where do you see all of this going? What are some of the big trends that you see as the chief innovation officer for Capgemini to think, actually, these are trends we need to watch around AI and how it might change over the coming years?
Okay, so first thing, we have always to remember that we're talking about something which is 2 years old. Well, it's not 2 years old. The transformer model was built in 2017. So to some extent, we might say the technology is about 8 years old, but for 6 years, nobody cared. I mean, when you were talking about GPT-1 or GPT-2, I can assure you, even at Capgemini, this was only a bunch of experts talking about the quality and the potential of that technology. So until ChatGPT, I mean, it was a silent technology. So it's still young, meaning it's not yet mature and it's not yet complete. So we have to expect major changes, I would say, in the years to come. In terms of technology, I see three or four maybe potential moves. The first one, very quickly, is we spent the year of 2022 and 2023 basically around the models. Like, if this was life or death, please choose the right model or you're dead. We now understand that it's not the case. Last year, there has been something like 135 models being issued on the market. So this is now a volume market, and this is much more of a library thing than just, something where you have to have the right choice. We're going to use different types of models. And this is very important to understand, that companies should look at big models, generic models, but also smaller models, because it's much easier and far less expensive to train a specific small model to your own needs for a specific application rather than using a big one. So you need both. That's evolution number one. People will use different types of models, open source or not, big or small, you don't care. The second thing, as I said, is we're going to a world which I would call hybrid AI. So most solutions will use different types of knowledge base. Generative AI will get better and better and will be the interface in most of the things we do, but there will be a lot of other sources of knowledge being linked to it. That's what I call hybrid AI or AI foundries to some extent. Like I put all my knowledge into one place. And the third thing, which is big, and it's all about that in, if you go to Silicon Valley and you know it today, it's all about agents. Okay, so everybody will tell you about agents and agentic systems, which is a very interesting way, in fact, to have models talking to each other or different sources of information talking to each other. So basically what agents are, there are two types of agents. The first one, an agent is to some extent a software robot, which is trained on a specific task and which will do something on your behalf. So rather than prompting directly into an LLM or something, you will ask an agent and interact with an agent and ask him to do a specific task. So that I would say level number one, and there's already a lot of agents being available in many, many startups around the world. Stage number two will be multi-agents. That's going to be a cohort of agents talking to each other and making sure, and they will be specialized by what they do best. So for example, you will have a legal agents, a marketing agents, and an HR agents. And if you want to build, I don't know, a marketing campaign in Germany, you will start building your campaign, and then you will ask the three agents to tell you what they know about the possibility of running that campaign into Germany. So the legal agent will tell you this is the law. The marketing agent will tell you this is what is working, and the HR agents will tell you this is what you can do and not do. That's an example. But at the very beginning, those agents will interact between each others using a workflow that you will decide. So you will tell you agent, you do that, and then you report to him, and then he will go do that, and then we will go. That's stage two. And stage three, but we're not talking decades, we're talking years. Stage three will be agents which will freely decide on their own workflow. They will decide what they should be doing next. And you have more and more, we begin to see more and more startups issuing some things like, for example, agents managing supply chains and making decisions and then checking on other agents to try to solve some problem that they detect. So I would say that's what I see. The evolution of models, the creation of hybrid environments, and obviously the birth and evolution of agents from single agents to multi-agents using their own workflow. That's what you
Wow,
can expect for the next 3 years.
very good. Yeah, I agree with that. There are definitely lots of exciting things on the horizon, and it'll be very interesting to see how agentic AI will actually be implemented in organizations. And I completely agree. We'll see much more hybrid and and multi-dimensional models that work together. So thank you for all your amazing insights today, Pascal. That was a really fascinating conversation on the state of the art in generative AI and AI in organizations today. Anyone who ever wants to re-listen to these conversations, simply head to my YouTube channel or my podcast. Thank you very much, Pascal.
Thank you, Bernard. It's always great to talk about technology, innovation, and the future.
I agree.